So good morning and welcome to this Understanding How Best to Use the Funding for English, Maths and Digital Skills webinar. This is an Ascentis webinar in association with eMemoir, and today we're joined by Matt Halliday of Ascentis and Beej Kaczmarczyk from eMemoir. As ever, we like to keep these sessions as interactive as possible, so feel free to use the question or chat facility at any point throughout the duration of this webinar. And you'll all be receiving a copy of the video recording and the slides, which again would encourage you to share with your colleagues. So without further ado, I'm going to mute my microphone and I'm going to hand over to Beej and to Matt. Thanks all. Keep the questions coming.
Thanks very much, Manic. Good morning to everyone, and hope that you're all well. And those of you that are looking out the windows at the snow and ice and sleet and rain, it's in Derbyshire. We've actually got nothing at the moment, so that makes a bit of a change. And then, as Manic says, in the course of the next 50 to 55 minutes, we want to look at some of the issues around the funding of English, maths and digital skills in programs for young people and adults. And I'm being joined by Matt Halliday from Ascentis, and Matt will join the discussion with me at a couple of points during the presentations. Also, just to sort of remind everyone that's listening in that we want to focus a little bit on curriculum planning, and I know that's an event that we'll be running later on in the year. But if you want to raise any of the questions in the course of this morning about how you plan for your English, maths and digital skills provision, either for young people or adults, please, chip in with questions or comments, because I think, making the best use of funding really starts with a clarity about your curriculum plan, how many hours you're allocating to each one of these areas, how much you're giving in terms of the support to the learners that might need learning support, as well as the requirements in your organisation, which might set, for example, minimum numbers for certain classes at certain levels and contribution rates and such like. So that's the sort of nature of the things that we'll be looking at today. Just to remind everyone where the funding comes for English, maths and digital skills. Essentially, if you're looking at England, the predominant sources of funding are from the ESFA for young people, who will fund 16 to 19-year-olds on study programs that are classroom-based. That, of course, extends to 19 to 25-year-olds who have got education healthcare plans. And those study programs are expected to include appropriate English or ESOL, maths, and that's obviously part of what we call the condition of funding. But that also extends to any programs that you might run for younger people that might be called pre-apprenticeships, formerly known as T-levels, and of course the new level 3 qualifications that are being increasingly offered by us at T-levels. When it comes to adults, the funding for adults is actually not exclusively by the ESFA. The ESFA only covers about 40 to 45% of all of the funding that's available for adult skills, including English, maths and digital skills, because a significant proportion is now being delivered by the combined authorities, which are using devolved powers. So I'm using the ESFA adults as a shorthand for some national provision for those of you whose residents are not covered by a combined authority, such as Greater London, Manchester, Liverpool, West Midlands, etc. But those entitlements are very similar, because in both the combined authorities and nationally, English, maths and digital skills are part of what we call the fully funded adult entitlement. Just want to clarify a couple of things about what we mean by those qualifications, because they're the qualifications which are eligible to be fully funded, i.e. you do not charge the learner a fee for them, that's the adult learner. You have to make sure they're the right qualifications, and that's why using Find a Learning Aim or have that contact with your awarding body, in this case Ascentis, to just clarify that. And the third group I'm going to look at are obviously those learners who choose the work-based learning route, who, as part of their apprenticeship standards, as part of the gateway process that allows them to go through 10-point assessment, are expected to meet any requirements for English and maths which are required for the achievement of that gateway process that allows them to then acquire the standard through an endpoint assessment. And they're funded on a different basis from above. In this case, you all know it's £471 per subject. That's for English and maths. at whatever the level is that that learner is studying that English and maths at. So those are the sort of areas, and then we know that there are other sources of funding, such as the DWP and Job Centre Plus, the residual of European Social Fund, and I want to talk about that particularly with the National Numeracy Programme, which is known as Multiply, which I know many of you are now getting your teeth into and starting to develop some innovative and creative numeracy offer for adults. But those are the main sources that we'll be looking at, as I said, in the next 50 or so minutes. And if at any point you just ask a question, then please do so. So let's have a look at the young people to start with. And the main headlines for next year, there's actually quite some good news. You know that in the current year, that's 22-23, there was an 8.4% increase in the base level of funding for a young person at 16 and 17-year-olds, obviously slightly less for 18-year-olds, where the programs are slightly not as long as for 16, 17-year-olds, and also pro rata for part-time. Well, this year, it's a 2.2% increase, which brings up the national rate of funding before any weightings, before any individual circumstance to take an account of for those young people, to 4642 for a 16 and 17-year-old and 18-year-old who's a high needs learner. But this is on condition that the total number of hours that they've got in the course of the year is 580 hours. And that obviously includes the English and maths as the study programme. For T levels, there are, of course, bigger bands. But again, the funding bands for those T levels have been increased quite significantly for next year as well. Just to note also, although this isn't affecting English, maths and digital skills, programme cost weightings for certain subjects such as engineering, manufacturing, construction, and the whole area of what I'd call computing, ICT, the digital side, where there's now a real problem in recruiting staff, their weightings have been increased. For example, engineering construction, now their weighting has gone up from 1.4 to 1.5. So when you look at the 4642 for a full-time learner, if they're in engineering construction next year, you'll be adding another 50% on to reflect the, the inherent costs of delivering that type of program. And that is basically the cost per hour, as well as the additional costs of just recruiting and retaining teachers in those subject areas. Although I would argue, and I'm sure many of you would agree with me, that finding good quality English and maths teachers is just as difficult as it is as finding people that might be going into the trades, and yet that hasn't been applied. Just remember though, and this is a point that was raised with me yesterday with a provider, is that when you look at the study programme for a young person, the learner's core programme, let's say it's engineering construction, the whole of the programme is weighted by the weighting for engineering and construction. So that would include all the component parts of the study programme, such as the English and maths, the tutorial, the work placement as well. There's also going to be some changes on the programme cost weightings for science and land-based study areas. They will go up, as well as the weighting for the Princess Trust Team programme. So that's good news for those of you that are offering English and maths in the Princess Trust Team programme. The additional funding for courses which are known as high premium, that will carry on. That's the level 3 courses in engineering, construction, catering, hospitality, as does the advanced maths premium, which is available for any learners that are studying maths at level 3, in addition to the numbers that you had studying maths at level 3 on the base year, whether that be 2018, 2019, it will be one of those years. So that's just a small additional payment that's put on top of what you're earning for that full-time learner on a study program. And that reflects the encouragement that's available financially to encourage more learners to study maths at level 3. So that would be an A level, core maths, what do you call it, further maths or whatever. So just watch out for that. I've been with several providers that actually those numbers haven't gone up, and therefore they haven't been earning that additional £600 per learner. So where do they appear in a study programme? Well, I think we've rehearsed this several times, but it's very important to remember a young person's study programme or a T level is funded in its what I call a holistic approach, meaning that once we take account of all the bits and pieces that make up that study programme, we add all the hours together, and as long as they come to 580 It used to be 540. Then we would deign that person to be a full-timer, which is very important for your 16 and 17-year-olds to maximize your funding. Now, that's going to be, of course, a case not only in this year, it will also be the case for the beginning of your study programs for the next academic year from the 1st of August 2023. Now, we also know that there will be some of your level 3 learners on a study program, which might be an applied general, they might be on a T level, who haven't yet got English and Maths GCSEs at grades 9 to 4. By the way, it only applies to English and Maths, it doesn't apply to digital skills or equivalent, and they will be expected to resit English and Maths at the appropriate level. There is an additional £750 spread over 2 years for each subject. So, for example, if you've got a level 3 learner on, say, a T level, and they've got English at grade 4 to 9, but not Maths, then there's an additional £750 above the funding for their core program, which, you know, which could be over £5,000–6,000, that will be then spread over 2 years, because these are mostly 2-year programs. So just be aware that those learners who have not got English and Maths at grades 4 to 9 on level 3 programs, and that's the equivalent of at least 2 A levels, can be draw down extra funding so that you can then help them with additional lessons, more one-to-one, English and Maths workshops, etc., to achieve those particular subjects. Now, that was originally intended only for T levels, but it has now been extended to learners on other study programs, which are not T levels. Something just to note. The other area, perhaps, that many of you are not aware of is that there is a block of funding that's available to all learners on study programs who haven't got GCSEs in English and Maths at grades 9 to 4. And that is block 2 funding. It's historical, it's last year's data, but what it does, it gives you a sense of how much is then available for what we call low cost, high incidence learning support. This is known as block 2 disadvantage funding. Block 1, just to remind you, is people's postcodes. Now, this is not to fund English and Maths, because that's already above in the core program, or it's in the additional funding for those learners on level 3 programs, but it's essentially there to provide maybe help with literacy and numeracy, smaller group size. It could be dealing with other types of learning support needs, such as moderate learning difficulties, dyslexia, and/or disabilities. It is not there to fund the English and Maths classes that you'll be putting on the study programs. It's more to recognise that that could be a proxy for other issues to do with learning and learning difficulties. High needs students obviously are a category of learner whose additional learning support costs come to more than £6,000. So that's added on to their funding for their core program on their English and Maths, etc. And that obviously will also be very critical in helping those learners achieve any improvements that they need in terms of their English, Maths and digital skills. Also be aware, by the way, that if those learners are categorized as high needs, the first 6,000 always comes in your allocation from the SFA. Anything above the 6,000 for high needs learners comes from their home local authority, something just to be aware of. And of course, for some of your learners who are not ready to do English yet, either as a stepping stone, either as a functional skill or as a GCSE, you'll be able to use ESOL for those learners. And that obviously does apply because, for example, we've got at the college I'm chair of, Ukrainian learners, young learners doing study programs who are doing ESOL to get them going and then progressing to functional skills or GCSEs. So just something to note about how English, Maths and digital skills are available inside the study program envelope of fundings. If you're looking at the question from Antonium, no, a learner who has not yet achieved grades 4 to 9 GCSEs, who's on a level 3 program, the condition is they've got to be on a level 3 program. And if you know that they haven't got that, you have the prior attainment level, then that £750 is earned per subject over 2 years. There's not an expectation they have to achieve it. It's basically that you're putting the provision on. So that 750 is split into 375 in the first year, 375 in the year, but that's on the condition that they will obviously be studying English and maths. So it recognises that they haven't got English and maths at the appropriate grades. There is no element of achievement attached to that. So obviously that's something to be aware of. But thanks for the question. Thanks, Antonio. Okay, so how does that look when you look at the study programme? You know that a study programme, T levels are slightly different because the T levels have got additional funding for English and maths and additional funding for work experience. But for a young person in a study programme, the English and maths is already funded inside the study programme. But there are still the additional 750 payments over 2 years for English and maths, because that's a recognition that they might need more than what you were allocating through the core programme to them. So the core learning aim could be A levels, could be GCSE resets, it could be a level 2 diploma, it could be a level 3 diploma or certificate, or it could be a course on independence, preparing for independence. English and maths are required if the learners haven't yet got a grade 4 to 9. Now, you might include English and maths in a young person's study programme because you might have a concern that the level of English and maths they've got is not sufficient for them to be able to, for example, study at level 3, and therefore you can put that on as part of the programme. And it doesn't necessarily have to lead to a qualification, it can just be part of your total programme. Or you can say that, for example, our engineers need a bit more maths to make it possible for them to be able to undertake, for example, some of the applied aspects of maths and the mechanics. And that's obviously the freedom that you've got within a study program. But of course, you must record those hours because they all contribute to making sure the learner's at least at 580 hours. So the careers education, the information, advice and guidance, the tutorial program, the enrichment program, all of these have got to be added together to make the minimum number of hours at 580 for a full-time 16 and 17. Less so for those learners that are 18, because it's actually a lower level of funding for them, except for those learners that are high needs learners. So you need to show the hours that are being planned for recognised qualifications. And if, for example, you're doing a maths for engineering 1 hour a week to improve the maths skills of learners that might already have, they might have a grade 5, they might have a grade 6, but they haven't got the background of saying applied and mechanics, then you might do that, but obviously record it as a non-qualification activity. Of course, the alternative is to in some cases, to perhaps offer the English and maths to those learners as a qualification if they want to improve their grade. That's up to them. Digital skills, by the way, can be part of the enrichment curriculum, or you can put it in as a recognised qualification using the essential digital skills qualification, where you know that the learner's current digital skills is below level 1, and you can either do that at entry or level 1, and that would obviously enhance the study programme. So here's an example of one of our learners. They're on a level 2 1-year programme. They're doing a level 2 vocational certificate, 340 hours. It's a 34-week term. The tutorial, you can see the work preparation is with an external employer. And this particular student has got neither English nor maths at the required level for progression to level 3. So they're doing 102 hours for English, 102 hours for maths. That basically is 3 hours a week. And that it could be functional skill, it could be a GCSE. It depends on the grades they've got. It depends on what they want to do next. It depends on whether they're going into an apprenticeship, whatever. But again, that gives you some indication of the allocation of resources. And when you're trying to make the best use of funding for young people, remember that if you can get a better outcome in terms of English and maths grades, particularly in terms of getting people who've got maybe a grade 3 to be able to get to grade 4 and meet those minimum requirements, or those maybe who are already achieving only grade 1 to get to 2 and 2 to 3, maybe using those who've got entry level functional skills to get to level 1, whatever is appropriate, is that to get the most out of the funding, you're going to make that investment in hours. And some of you might say, well, 3 hours a week is good, but we can only afford 2 hours. Well, you might get different outcomes. 3 hours might be good, but actually 3.5 or 4 hours might be better for some of the learners to be able to make sure that once they've got their essential skills, they can actually progress vocationally or academically. So again, this is the decision that your organisation makes. But you can see that this learner next year, because they're over 580 hours, it's 616 hours, they would be earning at least £4,642 before any other changes in funding. Now, because this learner is on a level 2 programme, they would not be able to draw down the £750 for English, £750 for maths, because they are only for level 3 programmes. This is a level 2 programme. So I know that one of you has already expressed concern, thanks very much, that this learner doesn't earn the £750 if they don't have GCSE English and maths at grades 4 to 9, because in effect, that's a way of making sure that we get more learners through at level 3. I'm just going to ask you now, for those of you listening in, just a question. If you were doing something like this, and this was a 1-year level 2 program in your institution, how many hours would you be giving at the moment for English and maths each week? Can just some idea, just throw a few, through the chat facility, just tell me what would be the number of hours that you're giving us. Chat facility, 3 hours a week, thank you. 3 hours, yeah, that's very much the sort of on the par we've got there. 3 hours. And can I also ask those of you, did you used to offer fewer hours in the past, and you've actually increased them to reflect the fact that sometimes people weren't progressing because there just wasn't enough time to cover those? No, some of you saying the same. Yeah, 2 hours for functional skills and 3 hours for GCSEs. Thank you, Yvonne. That was quite a common model. Functional skills was getting less than GCSEs, but it's good to see now that, yeah, quite a lot of you see 3 hours for each. Some of you saying, yeah, 2.5 hours. Yeah, so that's a fairly, that gives you some idea of what other providers are doing. So thanks for responding to that. Now, of course, the other questions that keep on coming up are, what else can we do in a study program? Matt, would you like to come in at this point?
Yeah, thank you, Beej. Yeah, basically, so some of our short online qualifications available to run alongside an existing study program, or we find centres also use them as part of induction weeks, progress weeks in sort of higher volume as well. And so the reason I wanted to mention this on the webinar today was this time of year when there may be some underspent AEB budget remaining, that they're ideal for that as well. So as you can see on the slide, we have a sort of a wide range of topics on that, from British values, citizenship, some environmental SOQs, safeguarding, mental health, ranging from 10 to 30 GLH. So I think there's 29 in the suite of qualifications, and 26 of those are funded. So if anyone is interested, I'd be happy to send that list and the funding details over. So they're available on demand with only a 5-day registration period. And what else is ideal with them is they're completely computer marked. So it's a 20-question 40-minute multiple choice test, and they actually come, each SOQ comes with its own individual Moodle resource, which has been updated, so you can track learner progress now through a single college sign-on. So it's excellent for learners to have self-learning along that, and obviously reducing tutor workload on that front. It's also good at this time of year as well to build a learner's confidence when they have exams coming up. If you can take one of our SOQs and get used to that exam process and build some confidence that way. So yeah, as I mentioned, I'm more than happy to send over some information on those to anyone who's interested. If you express any interest in the chat function, be happy to send that over to you. Thanks, Beej.
That's great. Thanks very much, Matt. And so I think it's quite useful to get a sense of how that study program can be built up, because I know sometimes people have got concerns about, well, what do we include in the enrichment? Enrichment doesn't have to lead to a recognised qual, but sometimes, as Matt said, it can be motivational. It can give people some sense of achievement. And obviously that's often a case when you've got learners who might be feeling less sure about themselves. And obviously, you can use English and maths and digital skills to supplement not only their personal goals, they're also essential to achieve those personal goals, and obviously critical in terms of progression. So, for example, for that level 2 learner that we've just looked at, some of these would be incorporated into the tutorial enrichment program, but also they would give opportunities for those learners to practice their English, maths and digital skills in different contexts, not just on their core learning. So I think, again, it's the flexibility of use. And I know that a few people have said, Matt, that they want some more information.
Yeah.
So
I'll just note with Danae's out, so I'll get the contact details pulled off afterwards, and I'll drop you an email with some more information. So thanks for the interest.
Brilliant. So key questions as you're going forward to make the best of your funding next year. how many hours are you going to plan to allocate? Is it going to be the 3 that we've just talked about? Are you going to increase the hours? Are you going to change the way you deliver those hours? But that's a key question. If you're going to make the most of funding, it's about making sure that you get your share of the resource for next year's young people. Particularly, for example, if you expect more young people to be recruited. I know some of you have already got some indications that there could be maybe several hundred more learners coming in next year. Well, that means you've got to have the extra staff, but also how many hours are you giving them? And are you going to change any of the hours allocation? Because that's obviously going to make the best use of the study program money, as it will do with any T level. Increased rate of funding for this current year assumed that there were 40 hours of activity, additional hours, and obviously that extends into next year. Just going to ask you this question. Did you see any of the additional 40 hours that each learner was getting? Any responses? Because clearly you say, well, if that's extra hours that are being funded out the 8.4% increase, did any of those come to you? Did you end up with an extra half hour a week, or did you end up with some intensive time? So any sort of responses on that? And there's a question, by the way, for Matt to if we look at that one's about how you record the short courses on the ILR when there isn't necessarily a qual aim. But if they're being delivered online, then there are different ways in which you can provide the evidence that this activity took place. And therefore, it would be very similar to what we're doing during COVID, when we recorded the activity that was online in terms of contact details, in terms of whether the person, when they logged on and logged off, etc. So you can use virtual timetables in that sense. Yeah, but we've got a couple of, sorry, Matt. Yeah.
There's a tracking function on the Moodle as well, which allows you to record the learner's progress.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Matt. And Antonium's just come back and said, yes, we increased, we used the 40 hours to partly to use it to increase the amount of time from 2.5 to 3. I think that's been critical, because I think one of the things you certainly will start to think about is, has that half hour a week spread over whatever number of weeks made a difference? If it's all gone to tutorial, this 40 hours, or all gone to the core vocational study, then that obviously distracts or detracts from the importance of the English and maths delivery, etc. So good answers there. Thank you. How are you using the additional funding for those students on level 3 program? If you know that there's an extra £750 for each subject spread over 2 years for those learners on T levels and on level 3 study programs, then how have you seen it? Any of you like to comment? Have you seen additional time? Have you had any more intensive English and maths provision for those level 3 learners? Have you had short, sharp sort of weeks of activity where you can really start to look at the skills in English and maths needed for those level 3 programs? Or has it just been lost somewhere in the totality of the funding? And I think we've had a couple of answers for that. Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah. I think, again, it's just important to note that that's coming into your organization. If you've had tuition fund money, which you have for, again, to take up some of the issues that students had with COVID, how's that been helping you with English and maths as well, to get those levels up to the levels that are needed for those learners to progress? I think eventually tuition fund money will stop, but at the meantime, there's an expectation that's been going in to help with those learners who have fallen behind, who have maybe got out of the habit of learning in a certain way or need some additional time. Study skills sessions that help. That's good. That's a good example. And did you know that Block 2 money was coming in? And has that enabled you, particularly with those learners at entry level, who might be doing some of our stepping stone qualifications? They might be doing awards, they might be doing extended awards, they might be doing certificates before as progression into baby GCSEs, have you been able to put on additional English and maths workshops? Small group learning, where, for example, at entry level, rather than have a class size of, say, 15, 16, you've maybe got half that, and you're using your disadvantage funding, in other words, learning support funding, to be able to create those smaller groups. Again, if you've got any evidence, then tell us. Like, for example, if you're working with entry level 1 and 2 learners who are 16, 17 years old, have you managed to use the learning support funding that's available? These might not be high needs learners, by the way. These might be what we call low cost learning support learners, but high incidence. Then, those are possible uses of that funding. And of course, the key question I'm going to pose you all is, if you had an increase in the number of learners coming into your study programs next year, a fair proportion of those are going to need English and maths. What problems are you encountering in just being able to put that provision on in terms of staffing? And again, that's again a very critical aspect of the making the most of the funding. It's very frustrating when we find that that's been the block, it's been the barrier to being able to maximize the funding, is simply we don't have enough staff to be able to do that. And of course, there are very attractive alternative places for them to go. So a few words about the adults. Most of the funding for adults is coming through the AB. There's been an underspend on that regularly, and you see that that's actually quite important. I think the worrying thing, and I'll talk a wee bit about this at the national conference next week, is how are we going to start to address the issues about the fall in demand for English and maths amongst adults. There's 200,000 fewer English and maths students than there were 10 years ago in terms of adults. Now, a lot of this now has to take account of the fact that these budgets are now delegated. Over 55% of the AEP is now delegated to these combined authorities. We know there's still a fair bit of subcontracting. And then we've got this new kid on the block called Multiply, which I want to just raise a few-ish, a little discussion point with you. In terms of the adult education budget, you know that English, maths, and digital skills are part of the entitlement, and they're funded through a formula. So that adult skills in the blue area is the formula. But obviously, there's a lot of adults who will be doing English and maths and digital skills as part of community learning, which is not formula funded. It's got a different way of being funded. That's the adult community learning. And of course, a lot of these learners will be learning in the workplace. They might be unemployed. They might be low wage. They might be preparing themselves for an apprenticeship. They might choose a community learning context rather than a college context. And for those learners, of course, their ability to study English, maths, and digital skills is also dependent on them having learning support needs recognised and provided for, as well as learner support in terms of, for example, financial hardship, childcare, etc. So we know that that package for adults, which is much more driven by the individual subjects they do, English and maths, each separately funded, digital skills separately funded, not the totality of the hours they do, which of course is the case for young people. So we know that we can use the AEP in a very flexible way to reflect needs at local community level. This is available for all those learners who are 19 over when they actually start the programs. And obviously you've got to remind yourselves that certain learners are entitled to have their programs fully funded. All learners, all adults aged 19 and over when they start the programs who haven't yet got English and maths GCSE at grades 4 to 9 are fully funded. And that fully funded extends to those that maybe might have, for example, a functional skill at level 2, but haven't yet got and want to convert that to a GCSE at grades 4 to 9. They would be fully funded, by the way, if they then did a GCSE in English and maths at grades, where the target was to achieve it at grades 4 to 9. All the learners who have got characteristics such as low wage, unemployed, are also entitled to be fully funded for things like the level 2 program, the level 3 program. And of course, that extends now to a lot more adults who want to retrain or upskill at level 3. This is known as the free courses for jobs offer. One thing to note, and we've certainly found this because we do the free courses for jobs offer, which is available to learners who are low wage, unemployed. They're trying to reskill and upskill in key sectors such as construction, engineering, digital, is that very often the barrier to them achieving that level 3 or that second level 3 in some cases is poor levels of literacy and numeracy. And therefore we find at the same time, we've often got to offer them the the legal entitlements, the fully funded courses in English and maths to get those up to the right level. So that's a very important aspect of this. And we know that English and maths, again, just to clarify a point with a couple of you, the extended awards and certificate courses that we offer at Ascentis are fully funded. So, for example, if you're offering the extended award in English skills at entry 3, which is funded at £300, then that's a legal entitlement. If you're offering the level 1 certificate in English, that's funded at £724. So make sure you choose the right qualification to be fully funded, because, for example, some of the starter programs, which are award size, are not always part of the legal entitlement. So just something to pick up on. And I know we've got a couple of people who have raised that question. The learners on digital skills, by the way, if they're assessed as being below below level 1, then they can be funded on an entry level course or a level 1 course. Claire, you've raised an issue. Obviously, what happens if the level that you assess them at is far below what do you call it, for the learner, in other words, the below entry 3. In effect, you can use some pre-entry programs and you can use a lower level program, but the problem is for the illegal entitlement, it is set at E3 or level 1. So you can have a sort of working towards as part of that. Pre-entry is eligible to be funded. So you've got a bit of leeway there. It's essentially you're putting together an entry level program, which will lead to the entry 3, but you'll have to cover a lot of the content at entry 1 and 2 as a sort of step up there. One of the things just to note, by the way, is that for a lot of the learners, Helen, you've raised the question, nothing's funded at level 2 though, and level 1 and 2 are not funded for 16 to 18. Just be careful about that, because when you look on the Find a Learning Aim, it will tell you whether these qualifications are eligible to be funded for level for 16 to 18, as well as for adults. So always just check out that these quals, and that's why I think Find a Learning Aim is a critical place for you to go. So thanks for that bit of clarification there. Have a look at the, do you offer fully funded English, maths and digital skills to employers? One of the areas that we think we're not making the most of, and I raised this issue with a provider yesterday, is how often do you find that, for example, if you go in to see apprentices in a workplace, you find that the rest of the staff look over their shoulders when they say, well, you're doing English and maths, a resit, or you're doing a functional skill. What about me? And we found that, for example, when we've done some training needs analysis and we've been using things like BKSB to assess all the other staff in a workplace who are not doing apprenticeships, we often find that they've got relatively low levels of English and maths. And then the employer comes to us and says, can you put on fully funded English, maths and digital skills for our employees? And we found that quite lucrative and quite a good way of using our capacity. The problem is, if you're already fully engaged with young people and adults coming into your organization, into your classes that you deliver on site, it's very difficult then to extend your capacity to include, for example, English and maths delivery. But we know that some of you do. Are any of you actually offering English and maths to employers? Because obviously, again, you can deliver them in the workplace and they're fully funded. They're not part of the apprenticeship. Don't worry about that. They're not. These are not apprentices. But can I just say, any show of hands, any of you offering English and maths to employers? Remember, it's fully funded, so the employer doesn't have to. Got a few of you? Yeah. Just a small number. Again, it might be a capacity issue that stops you doing that. In terms of local flexibility, when your learners are not ready to do a first full level 2 or first level 3, will often want to do entry and level 1 programs. This might be because they're wanting to upskill. They might be not ready to do a full level 2. They might want to restart their career. They can do a whole range of qualifications which are eligible to be funded. And they might be at entry and level 1, and they can be incorporated into things like sector-based work academies, where you're trying to, for example, help people to get into certain jobs. You've got them for 2 weeks working with you. You might improve their English and math skills. You might offer them employability skills. You might offer them a short digital skill. You might be using RAPA to support them. But the local flexibility means that very often you can put this together with legal entitlement. For example, in this case, English. You can put it together with an employability skills program. And then you're giving that person the opportunities to either progress to a level 1 and a level 2 with you, if they haven't yet got them, or to progress to a pre-apprenticeship program or to an apprenticeship. So again, using some of the local flexibilities, which for those of you operating in devolved authorities are often quite extensive. So something just to sort of be aware of. That's great, thank you. A couple of you have said you're doing that. So building English and maths into your flexibility offer means that you're doing English plus, maths plus, digital skills plus, something like employability skills or a short vocational taster or whatever that helps the person move on to the first full level 2. The contribution tables for this current year, I'll just put up for you. when you get these slides, you can look at them in a bit more detail, but it just simply summarizes some of the things we've said so far about where English maths up to and including level 2, covered by paragraphs 148 to 154 of the guidance. So look at that in a bit more detail, but these are fully funded where they're part of the legal entitlement. If for any reason you want to offer non-regulated learning, so for example, you might want to offer pre-entry in literacy and numeracy, so digital skills. If you're doing so, please remember that this is because the learners are not ready to do a regulated or nationally recognized qualification. And therefore, you've got to meet certain principles. And those principles, I just want to remind you, the key thing is to have something in place that's known as RARPA, which that recognizes that that learning has got to be recorded in a different way for both audit purposes, but also to allow that person to progress possibly to a regulated version of, for example, English, maths, or digital skills, as well as ESOL. So many of you are currently offering non-regulated English, maths. Can we just check again? I'll cover this in a bit more detail at the national events, but can we just have a show of hands? How many of you are offering any non-regulated, particularly pre-entry level? Yeah. We've got just a handful, which is surprising. Can we just ask, by the way, oh, we've got a couple of questions coming through. Oh yeah, we've got a couple more. Non-regulated digital skills. Good. Again, thank you, Becky. That just, again, highlights how you can make the best of the funding by having that flexibility in your offer. You know, because I know sometimes you think, oh, we've always got to offer a recognized qual. Yeah, but that might mean that some people in the community, some people with lower levels of confidence, maybe those furthest away from them, just can't access your provision. So, you know, I think that's why it's so important. It's having all these different sort of pathways that make the best of the funding that's available for English and maths. And that's recognized in the funding formula. Now, a couple of words now. Matt, you've got some good news.
Yeah, some really exciting news. It's been in development for a while at Ascentis. So we're going to be offering English and maths functional skills from entry 1 through to level 2, beginning in January 2024. So at the moment, we're currently looking for centres who'd like to be involved in the pilot. So a little bit of information on it firstly. So the assessments will all be digital assessments, apart from the speaking and listening, obviously, on that. So we're really excited about it. We've had some really good feedback on the layout of the assessment so far. And basically, yeah, it's an opportunity, if you did want to be involved in the pilot, for you to help develop and help shape these qualifications, really. So it's a really sort of exciting opportunity for yourselves and for us. Just in terms of support you'd receive, obviously receive support from our product development team, from quality assurance, all the way through. So it would be completely supported through it. And obviously there'd be no charge on that. So if you were interested in participating, or you'd like to set up a meeting to discuss it in more detail, please let me know. I'll put my email address on the bottom of the slide there. But again, if you want to mention in the chat function, and I'll send you an email, and hopefully can have a conversation about that in more detail. So cheers, Beej.
That's great news. It's great news. And I know many of you will be looking for that as your progression from any of our standalone quals, or stepping stone quals, or skills quals as well. Yvonne just posted.
Sorry, Beej, just on that as well. And we're going to touch on the English and Maths conferences that we have coming up, one next week and one in Birmingham later on in the year, but we will have more information on functional skills there, and our product development team will be there as well. So sorry to interrupt, just to
no, well, that's great news, and hopefully you will be able to join us either next week in London or later in the year in Birmingham. So that's good news. Just a question from Yvonne, Matt, can you use RARPA for adults in standalone English and maths? The funding guidance reads that you can only do that if they have a learning difficulty. Now, I had to clarify this once before, because actually it infers that, but it actually wasn't the case. So I think it's much broader than just having a learning difficulty. It's where, for example, it isn't appropriate for the learner and they're not ready to be able to do a nationally recognized qualification. I know we're trying to make it possible by having, entry 1, but of course, entry 1 is quite broad. But particularly where you're using this for Can I just check with Yvonne? Are you using it mostly for pre-entry English and maths? Just if Yvonne can get back to me. Just checking, not necessary. I think the assumption was it would be predominantly for pre-entry. But what I'll do with you, Yvonne, I'll go back and look at the note I've got and send it through to you. I'll make sure that Marek reminds me to send you a note that actually clarifies that, because I had to clarify it, I think, Matt, on last year's conference. I had to clarify that again about that, where you can use RAPA with English and maths. So thanks for that question. It's raised the need to look at it. Formula, by the way, works again at individual learner level on each individual learning aim that an adult does. English and maths don't normally draw down a weight. The GCSEs do, which is interesting, and actually so does entry-level maths, as I'll just remind you. You then take account of which postal code the learner comes from, and if your delivery is in London or the Southeast, you also get the area cost uplift. Just one thing, just for a couple of you, we have had some people asking, well, if we do English and maths by blended learning, by online wholly, does it get the same level of funding? The answer is it does, but you must make sure that you've got all the evidence of what learning took place and the interventions, etc. 80% of your funding for an adult on English, maths, digital skills is earned by retention, 20% by achievement. That's exactly the same as for your apprentices. Since it's a legal entitlement, almost all of your English, maths and digital skills learners will be fully funded. But remember, the digital skills learners only if they're doing the essential digital skills qualification. And of course, every one of those adults is entitled to have learning support if you've identified that they've got a learning support need. So again, how many hours you put in, so you can see that, for example, the extended award in English and maths at entry 3, it's £300. So the assumption is that the number of hours there is between 45 and 60. It's weighted at A. However, when you look over at the GCSEs, English and maths GCSE are funded at 811. So in effect, they earn a little bit of a weighting, that weighting of 12% on top of the the base level is giving it 811. Functional skills in English and maths are normally £724. So you can see that, functional skills. But when you look across at the entry level maths, that's E1, E2 and E3, 941. So they're drawing down a much bigger weighting that reflects maybe the individual needs of those learners in terms of things like what would be the class size, etc. So again, pick that up in terms of the funding rates. I think those rates will not change this year, the year coming, 23-24. There might be some changes 24-25. So you might get excited, but I don't think you should do yet. And I'll explain why in the last couple of minutes of this webinar. So the funding is basically, as I said, functional skills, set for entry. Stepping stone qualifications are funded depending on the number of hours. Again, as I said, 60 guided learning hours gives you 300. Essential digital skills funded as part of the legal entitlements. They've got a rate of funding at £300. And again, it's available for those learners at pre-entry level that might have significant learning difficulties and or disabilities as part of a personalised learning programme where assessment is identified. Now, that's the particular phrase that's created the problem, but actually it doesn't just mean with significant learning difficulties. And I said for Yvonne, I'll find that bit of text that explains that's not to be interpreted that way. Here's an example of someone doing that extended award in English skills, out of the legal entitlement, fully funded. It's done over 3 months. You always get what we call a double payment for program in month 1. So it's known as the N+1. So in other words, if you planned it for 3 months, then you can maximize your funding in the first month because you get 2 of the 4. The N+1 makes it 4, but you get a double on program payment in month 1 to cover the cost of entry, induction activity, initial assessment, etc. Then £60 each one of the other months on evidence that they're still learning and still undertaking the activities. And then obviously the achievement funding is again £60. That's 20%. Now you can immediately see how you make the most of your funding, because if learners don't are not retained, you lose a proportion of funding. If they are retained to the end but don't achieve, so you haven't got a pass, then obviously you've got a 20% loss in funding there as well. So how do you make the most of the funding? You maximize your retention, you maximize your achievement, and that means things like getting your initial advice and guidance right, getting the right level of learner, getting the right support for the learner, and obviously good quality teaching and learning. So there's a big impact on your funding. And as I said, learning support is critical. Again, I've been told sometimes that our learners can't get learning support because they're on quite a low level English and maths. Yeah, they might have literacy and numeracy issues that raise that, but they can also have learning difficulties. They could have emotional difficulties. That assessment is needed to make sure that in a more holistic way, we know what the individual learner's needs are. And that can then be used to create the smaller group size, particularly at entry level or pre-entry, or put in an additional member of staff to help the learners when they're doing any of their work in class or online. The discretionary learner support is much more to do with financial difficulties. But again, you might find that you don't retain some of your learners because you haven't identified the learning support or learner support needs, or you've not been consistent in the way in which you've applied it, or you've identified the learning support needs, but not been able to find a member of staff to support them. So something to be aware of. Now, for those of you living in devolved, where you've got devolved authorities, and I've highlighted that, remember there are some freedoms. And for example, the best freedom in London, places like Greater Manchester, is that they've varied the national rate. You get 10% more for English, maths and digital skills than people outside of the combined authority. In other words, people who are paid, their learning is paid for by the ESFA. So there's variations, there's flexibilities. In some cases, almost all ESOL is fully funded, and there's no need for the ESOL learners to find any proportion of the fees. Low wage waivers are higher in London and some of the devolved authorities compared to the national. We have very innovative bottom-up approaches, and this extends to things like the Multiply programme. So you can see a lot of things are happening in devolved authorities, and as more and more devolution occurs, I think it's important for you, working with employers, working with the local community, working with the third sector, to say, wait a minute, before learners can achieve those vocational outcomes, those outcomes at level 2 and 3, we should be giving more priority to English, maths, ESOL, digital skills as enabling, as the essential skills which allow people to achieve some of the things they want to do. So I think at the moment, the national entitlement is still determined by the DFE, but the rates can be varied above the rates that the ESFA offers, something to be aware of. So just a few words of conclusion before I just mention apprenticeships very quickly and Multiply. All the things I've looked at, legal entitlements, local flexibilities, non-regulated learning, learning in the workforce, in the workplace and for the workforce, making the most of non-formula funded community learning is a great progression, working with families on English, maths and digital skills, working on outreach, and then obviously making the most of what's happening at devolved authorities. My advice is, if you want to make the most of your funding for English, maths and digital skills, make sure you have a clear strategy for each one of those elements. And obviously that extends to most of your adults, but also make the best of it for your young people in study programs and T-levels. The other thing to note, by the way, just Matt and I were talking about this before, is that remember, there's going to be a new functional skill in digital available from the 1st of August this year. That's the aim. And obviously some of the other functional skills qualifications will no longer be funded. And you can see that some of them were not funded from this year, some won't be funded from next year. That's particularly entry level and level 1 ICT functional skills from the 1st of August in the next academic year, when obviously I'm talking about from 1st of August to 2023. Obviously, when we see what the new functional skills looks like in digital skills, we'll do a wee bit more on that, but it's just something to be aware of, just a reminder. So on apprenticeships, those of you who are offering English and maths on apprenticeships, it's an essential part of the apprenticeship. It means the learner can't get through the gateway to do the endpoint assessment if they don't attain the English and maths that's required. We know that obviously the encouragement is that where they've managed to achieve a functional skill at level 1, they're encouraged to study and to be assessed for functional skills 2 if there's enough time on the standard to allow that. We know that that was relaxed, and obviously, you know, it was relaxed during COVID, etc. We know that, for example, for some of your learners, ESOL will be a good substitute for English. They might be doing entry 3 rather than level 1. We know that. We know that for some, British Sign Language would be a more appropriate qual. I think all those flexibilities, still, the big problem is the £471. Is that enough to be able to get someone through a functional skill at level 2 or a GCSE at grade 4 to 9, if that's what they need? When you compare it to the rates of funding you're getting for young people and adults, which are much better and much more generous. It's a key question, and I'll come back to it again and again. And I think it's unfair. I think we should have parity, that any person, whichever route they're taking, we at least recognise the cost of providing English and maths should be recognised with the funding for apprentices. Those of you that came on to our first of the webinars on this area of Multiply will realise that this is a national programme, not just England. It's working across the whole of the UK. It's basically the successor to European Social Fund. The aim is to give adults the opportunity, if they haven't got at least a grade 4 GCSE in English, in maths, to improve their maths skills, but by using innovative and different approaches, working in partnership with other providers, with your local authority, with your LEP, with charities, etc. And this prospectus is now available. And I know many of you are working with your local authorities, possibly with the LEP. You're working in partnership on some of these exciting approaches to getting adult numeracy skills up to a level where they might be able to progress to a full level 2, a level 2 qualification in maths. But it mustn't be a duplicate of anything that you're already offering. All the things I talked about earlier, like level 1, our extended awards, there mustn't be duplicates of it. There must be ones that allow the learner to progress to them. It might be targeting the hardest to reach care leavers, those recently released from prison. But I know that some of you are already involved in coming up with these innovative programs. Any of you got further than, I've actually progressed it to the point where you've got something now that's been agreed that you're going to put forward in response to the prospectus? Anyone got any of you got some, managing money for parents, how to make the best of your benefits, dealing with how to improve your math skills by working with your kids, or your grandchildren, whatever. I'm looking at all kinds of innovative, Multiply with students on sector-based work academies, good. Doing numeracy to support your child, brilliant. These are really good examples. Let's see how it develops, but I think there's a big gap. Why don't we have an adult literacy skills program? Because I think it's just as important that we have that. And that would certainly be something with cooking on a budget, brilliant. Linking it with other things like sector-based work academies and other skills, ESOL, using improvements in language to improve your mathematical skills, brilliant, good, really good examples. Teaching people to read, good. Gambling, no, gaming, sorry, I got that one wrong. Yeah, I wonder what we'd call the adult literacy skills program. Would we call it something like drama? The grammar program. Thanks for that, a bit of advice there. I'm sure we'll come up with, but I think it's significant that hasn't been considered yet as being a key aspect of the Shared Prosperity Fund. So hopefully, same questions we posed for young people, for adults. How many hours do we give? Do we have a continuous level of activity where learners can go into English, maths, and digital skills programs at different points in a year? How do we use non-regulated and stepping stone learning? I think clearly improving English and maths earning would be through improving your retention achievement, making more effective use of learning support. But I think also embedding English, maths, digital skills into those vocational employability skills programs. And I know that some of you, for example, almost all of your ESOL learning is ESOL plus. So very often ESOL plus maths, ESOL plus digital skills has been a good way of doing that. And just for those of you that asked that, can you give us a bit of a curriculum plan this just shows you how we can prove what the earning capacity is. I've chosen that EDSQ at 50 guided learning hours, the Essential Digital Skills Quality Entry Level 3. £300 weighted rate. It's 80% retention, 240. It's basically the same as the one I showed you before, but it's now Essential Digital Skills, £60 for achievement. If we had 15 starters and we trained 14 of them to the end, let's assume that the one who withdrew halfway through the program, so when you earn £120 for them, 12 achieved, this is £60. Your total earnings before any uplifts for things like disadvantage or area cost would be 4,200. If we put 50 hours in, and you can see there at an average of £50, I'll just move that up, an average of £55, sorry, gives us a total teaching cost of 275. Oh, remember, that's not what the teacher earns, it's what we cost the teacher hours. You'd have a contribution rate of 1,450, which is 35%. Now, I know for most of you, that would not be good enough because your organization would be looking for maybe at least a 40 to 50%. But the planning workshop, this sort of seen a message. The curriculum planning would mean that, yes, I would know that that would not be sufficient. Now, I might use that as a loss leader. I might have another one that has 18 starters, but it's a very simple question. What would turn that to a better contribution rate of maybe nearer 40%? And the question would be, and the answer would be, well, either have another starter. You should have. Why did you lose someone? And why did of the 14 that were retained, why did 2 fail? So you know, if you had one more retained, that would be all the way through the year would be 120. 2 more achievers would be another 120. That's 240. That immediately changes your earnings and changes the contribution rate. So you should have things like this available to you through things like Forecast or through EBS, whatever tools you're using, to say, can I plan and cost all of the provision and then prove my contribution rate? We will pick this up at a later event, and I'll make sure that you get notice on that later event on curriculum planning. So a couple of things about the future. I've mentioned some of them already. We've got, are they going to be part of the priorities? How is this going to be affected by the local skills improvement plans that are going to start to develop in your area? Is there going to be any change in the funding rates? Not at the moment, but there might be next year. How do we increase the demand for essential skills such as English and maths? I think we need to have that national strategy. What are the quals that are going to be eligible to be funded? Now, that's affecting level 2 and level 3 quals and below, and level 4 and 5 and 6. Will there be any changes to English, maths and digital skills? We've got the skill shortages in terms of the workforce, and all of us have got to be more accountable for what we put on as provision in terms of meeting local priorities. But the proposed changes to the funding, which has been consulted on, we're going to look at all of these different aspects on the left-hand side, but we do know that in the current year, 2022-23, those of you with AEB allocations, there will be a small increase in your allocation. It's 2.2%. This is not a change in your funding rates. This is for 22-23. It will be to basically, it's using what we expect to be the unspent AEB to make sure that many more of you get closer to your allocation target of 100% or at least 97%. So the 2.2% is an increase in your total allocation, not in the rates of funding. For 24-25, we now know that there will be some new funding bands. They're called the simplified funding bands, and they will not become apparent till 24-25. But I've got a bit of bad news for you. English and maths will still be funded at £6 per learner hour. That's roughly what you're getting now. And if you look at things like construction, they would be funded at £9.60 per learner hour. So it's not good news. And I hate to end on that. We hope that we would have got more for English and maths per learner hour as a result of this review. But the consultation is ongoing. There'll be another document that'll be out soon. So it's time for us to maybe get together and say, let's get a proper rate of funding for adults doing English and maths, and certainly for apprentices doing English and maths. We've asked a whole lot of questions. Thanks very much. We'll get back to you, some of you, with answers to those, particularly to Yvonne. But again, Matt, let's remind people that the English and Maths Conference, we've got one next week in London, and then on the 11th of May in Birmingham. Could you just remind, Matt, people of the date of the ESOL qual?
Yeah, just to quickly say, on all the conferences, they're free to attend as well. So they're free to attend, and booking links are on the events section of the Ascentis website. We also have 2 ESOL conferences, one in Manchester on the 20th of April, and one in London on the 26th of April. So we'll have English for Action Speaking, Philida Shalenkins, Beej himself will be there, and Sufi and Sadiq as well, along with some workshops. So it's a great networking event, as well as some of the speakers we put on. So hopefully, if any of the conferences are of interest, hopefully to see you there. And we also have a curriculum planning conference in the works as well, which is looking like it's going to be the 24th of May in Manchester. So again, one to keep you updated on that front.
That's brilliant. Yes, I think one of you did ask about when the curriculum planning was being planned. So we've got the 24th of May, but just simply look at our website and we'll confirm all of these things for you and the locations, etc. So thanks very much. Thank you for your questions. If you want to contact myself or Matthew, those details are now on the final slides. You'll get the slides as soon as we digitize them. Marek, any more questions that people were asking, just in case I've missed any?
No, not that I can see. And again, you've got the contact details there. So if anything comes up, and obviously for those of you who are watching this video recording, please get in touch with the team. They're always happy to help. No, I can't see anything else. Are you happy for me to stop the recording?
Yeah, we'll stop recording at this point. Thanks everyone for your questions, and thanks very much for